Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is much more than a daily report. We really do have a knowledge platform, if you will, from which we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through these reports, but also through these podcasts. And we are doing webinars and hopefully live events in the future. So, along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, who, by the way, is also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our weekly podcast, the topic of which is 2020, 2021, 2022, gasp, where are we and what lies ahead? So, Shelley, take a deep breath, exhale the last 3 years, rinse and repeat. and this may take a multiple number of repeats due to the number of unprecedented events that seemed to slam into our very beings from unexpected directions everywhere. The culmination of all of them, many of them which will continue into 2023, by the way, nearly unhinged whatever anchored us to a civilized, more reasonable and orderly march forward. You know, something like normal. Well, then there came the unprecedenteds. Note, that's a plural, starting in 2020, shortly after enjoying the bubbly and watching the ball drop on January 9th, the WHO announced that a deadly coronavirus had emerged in Wuhan, China. It would kill millions of people around the world, and there have been a myriad of variants since. In the US, the economy was shut down, except, of course, for essential businesses that catered to only the basic needs of people. So, with a lingering hangover from the Great Recession of 2008, still not fully recovered, the global pandemic just blew the recovery right out of the water, followed by another government fire hosing of money to save a total collapse of the entire economy. Essentially, free money would be the good news part of the unfolding mess, but the bad news is that it sparked inflation. You know, closer to home, Shelley, in addition to decimating many of the non-essential retailers, or at least pummeling all top and bottom line growth, the supply chains for most product categories completely blew apart as the pandemic disrupted consumers' lives, upending all pre-pandemic behavior. Retailers and all of commerce lost all bases for merchandise decision-making, both online and off, thus exacerbating the supply chain calamity around the world. So unprecedented number one, Shelley.
Absolutely, Robin. And how about number two, the war, which all countries on this planet are and will be directly or indirectly affected by in some way. We've already seen, you know, the global supply chains were mangled and struck dead. You mentioned that. They still haven't fully recovered. And then we have China's zero COVID approach, which then shut down more factories. That resulted in many companies really trying to think about sourcing and, you know, different ways of sourcing and sourcing in other countries. And then, of course, trillions of dollars that were fire hosed into the economy, both after the Great Recession and then after the pandemic, which, of course, triggered that inflationary spiral, adding angst about holiday shopping. Worse, not knowing whether there'll be a soft landing in 2023. There's still a lot of question marks out there, or as many hawkish economists believe, whether we're going to have a crash landing. So in the midst of all this, the only drivers that have the power to kind of correct and stabilize and sail us into sunny waters are, guess who, Robin?
Yep.
The consumer. And since 70% of our GDP is consumption, It's all about the consumer. But I'm going to give you a silver lining that you're looking for. I was at the NRF show in January, of course, and I've heard actually a lot of positive conversations about consumerism going into 2023. There was a panel by Mark Matthews. He's the VP at the National Retail Federation. He does all the research and development, along with the CEO of Affinity Solutions. They're a data-led intelligence platform, so they're collecting purchasing signals from consumers through purchasing and data collection on payments. Jonathan Silver. And what Mark talked about, which was fascinating, the guy from the NRF, was that while the consumer price index increased 6.5% in December, when you look at that past rolling 12 months, if you just took that last 6 months through December, the CPI only increased 1.9%. So that really tells us and shows us that the pricing has come down. And the other thing that was really interesting is he also talked about how shelter meaning rent and home, the cost of shelter, that number impacts the consumer price index significantly. And he said it accounts for over 30% of the CPI number. So in December, the consumer price index only dropped 0.1%. Anyway, all of this really talks about how the consumers are really spending more money. We also know that the index for gasoline was by far the largest contributed to the monthly of all items decreases for December. So it was, offsetting some of that shelter indexes. The other thing is that the NRF economic report shows the labor market and consumerism will impact the economy going into 2023. So they're saying these two factors are going to impact what will happen in 2023. So the rhythm of holiday sales continued at a healthy pace. I watched it every single month. I'll share some stats with you in a second. So while the consumers don't only want to pay more for goods, no one likes high prices, right? But they're actually willing and able to pay the high prices. So even with inflation, retail sales grew 7.2% for the year up through the first 11 months. So clearly, that's a great sign on where the consumer is sitting. So Jonathan Silver said consumer purchasing is up 6.8% in December. That's based on his data that he gets through Affinity Solutions. But here's the good news, Robin. I did an analysis on holiday shopping. I include October because you have to include October. The holidays started in October. So October, November, December, you take those 3 months, that's holiday spending. It was up 8.3% over last year.
Well, Shelley, you go back, you've got a bunch of people there that are very smart, and everybody during this time of year, and particularly at the NRF, everybody wants to sound happy, happy, happy. But I still don't believe it. I believe we're in deep trouble. And I'll go back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and I'll call it unprecedented number 3. And you've heard this. We've talked about it. It could be one that we did. I know we did bring it up. The idea that trying to forecast, in the middle of this chaotic mess is a fool's game. And I don't care who says it's going to be terrific. They don't even know. Maybe some places will be terrific, others will, because we still haven't gotten back to any building, any normal to go forward with. The problem is that it doesn't matter how many surveys or who is doing them or how they're done. There can be no consensus because the consumers themselves often respond with what they think will be what the survey wants to hear. So what do we have? What we have as a result of these surveys and the brilliant minds who conduct and analyze them, what do we have? One word, Shelley, it's a mush. And a gazillion different forecasts, or in my vernacular, guesses. Nobody's really nailed this down yet. And one last word on this, which we also have discussed before, and that is the single reason why all of these guesses are so varied and wildly without a basis is because of the unprecedented effect of the pandemic, which upended everything we viewed as more or less normal historically prior to COVID. And most importantly, it has changed human behavior in significant ways and which are now sticking, so to speak. So, and a final opening note here, forecasting is even more of a guessing game because pre-COVID projections would at least have some benchmarks or bases. Today we really have nothing. It's like learning to swim for the first time, and no wonder the biggest buzzword is agility, and more so than ever. If you can't reasonably predict things, you have to be agile to adapt, obviously, to the unknowns coming at you. So, Shelley, here's the macro and most important point that lies ahead for every aspect of our lives that have been upended by the pandemic, exacerbated by the war and major economic events. And that is, yes, what lies ahead is a necessity for, as I said, agility. Essentially, businesses have to strategically and structurally change their entire business models with absolutely no reference back to 2019 or before. A simple example we used in forecasting, the tendency is to think that consumer behavior will come back in alignment with inventory flows, and the online should return in a similar manner, and we could go on. Just suffice it to say, no, that old normal we used to know as normal came to a full stop in the early months of 2020. So, Shelley, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, first I'm going to say that we know all that great forecasting that took place, which you call a guessing game. I agree with you. That led to this massive excess inventory problem. And even though I just gave you a Pollyanna view of holiday, sales up 8.3%, they had to get rid of inventory. Most companies were overstocked by 20%. Total retail was overstocked by 20%. It's different by category, obviously. But the problem is that even though sales are up, they're probably going to take a hit to the bottom line because they're discounting everything to get rid of the inventory. So, 2023 has to be about righting the ship, getting the ship right. And Robin, I think an example of what you just said about strategic and structural change might qualify for unprecedented number 4. And in what you and I believe is inevitable, Robin, because it's the only way retailers can grow in an oversaturated marketplace. And that's the shifting consumer demands, and technology makes it possible to us. And this is just common sense. So when I was at the NRF show, there was a sea, and I'm talking a sea of artificial intelligence, computer vision that's being used to really further the ability to use technology in new and profound ways. It's really the first time I've seen computer vision use cases in retail. So through machine learning, computers can be trained more quickly, accurately, more consistently than humans. And so therefore, if we're really utilizing this technology, we can really help that shopper journey. And this is what's going to be the big differentiator is consumers are expecting heightened experiences when they're shopping, and retailers are finally making the investments in technology. So I'm talking about expedited checkout. Think of a world with no lines or queuing, but seamless checkouts that are super accurate and fast. It's just accelerating, and it's all about moving value, your products and services closer to the consumers. Literally, you write about this all the time, Robin. It's in your book. But this may sound simple. Well, the concept is simple, but the execution is very difficult to do. So, for those who really understand it, the consumers want everything, as you coined. Just don't fulfill my needs, but satisfy my dreams. I think that's a quote from your book, Robin. And a big part of that is convenience, by the way, which is also intensified due to the pandemic for most people. Time is the new luxury, time and wellness, especially for young people. So convenience can really be online in your living room. It can be brought to you by a robot. a drone. In fact, the same robot can do your shopping for you. So it can be a shop across the street. It can be BOPIS. It could be buy in a store, have it delivered, on
Yeah.
and on and on. Have I left anything out here?
I think you covered it. No, what did you leave out?
Well, and then there's this big one. Think Ulta Beauty using Target's, 1,500 plus stores to get closer to their consumer. And likewise for Target, Sephora did the same thing with Kohl's, and Toys is doing Macy's. Toys R Us is doing with Macy's. So guess what? Those who are going to survive, they already started moving in these directions.
Yeah, I think you're right. And and it's just, the ideas of putting brands, retail brands within bigger brands like Toys R Us and Macy's, correct? And there's going to be a lot more of that going on, for sure. So, it's all about providing quicker and easier access for consumers, and quicker and easier access to consumers. So it is a distribution century. I coined it preemptive distribution in my co-authored book. The brand or retailer that gets closer to the consumer faster, ahead of competitors, will win. From day one, Amazon has been perfecting its last mile distribution since their inception, really. So, and as you and I made a presentation, the biggest strategic and structural shift, and all about getting their brands and retail shops closer to consumers, it is the small neighborhood store strategies of Walmart, Target, Macy's, Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's. And it will accelerate in 2023 for sure.
Absolutely. And by the way, Robin, even when we talk about these big legacy malls, everyone thought death of the malls, death of the malls. Well, Simon Properties acquired a large percentage of the equity of Jamestown. So as you may know, Jamestown focuses on creating mixed use space. So they're calling it a strategic partnership. And it's really, Jamestown is a real estate company that's focused on creating these inspiring spaces. So they have about $13.2 billion in assets and a portfolio spanning key markets throughout the US, Latin America, Europe. So their current and previous projects include, they did One Times Square, they did Chelsea Market in New York, they did Industry City in Brooklyn, Pond City in City Market in Atlanta, Girardelli Square in San Francisco, and on and on. So it's apparent that these combined entities are going to be making some major creative changes. And if they can't move them all closer to the consumer, they're likely they're going to have to make major changes to compel consumers to travel to the mall for whatever experiences that they're going to enjoy, and for the time that they're going to spend there.
Yep, for sure. So Shelley, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say that, with the pandemic, the malls obviously were hit really hard, especially the enclosed malls for obvious reasons. So I think that this whole Simon Jamestown deal are really hitting the precise moment when consumers are actually clamoring to get back to the stores and inspiring spaces. Yeah,
I give Simon a lot of credit for, envisioning how he needs to move forward. So, this was strictly a strategic discussion, but most important for our audience, because if they are not beginning to address all of the major points we laid out, and with no reference to old pre-pandemic cycles and strategies, if they are not all in, frankly, it might be too late. So, Shelley, give us a macro of what lies ahead for 2023 as kind of a final note.
Sure, Robin. Here's what I can say about 2023. So the economic uncertainty is going to continue for sure. And there's a lot of surveys out there, like the one from IPSOS, and they did this global optimism survey. They say that the optimism for what's going to happen in the economy has fallen globally from 77% to 65%. So there is that dip in what people think about the global economy. And it also showed that only 46% of people believe the global economy will be stronger in 2023. And lastly, 50% of people, this is crazy, think major stock markets around the world are going to crash in 2023.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah, but once again, if you look out across the landscape in every industry, and the volatility in so many places in our lives, the war, economics around the globe. I mean, there's so much stuff that is, we're really, on the edge of huge shifts, and I'm afraid some of them are going to be bad, and then some of them are going to be good. But Shelley, 100 years from now, okay, think about that. Will history? Well, I know I won't be alive, but will history look back on this period of really unprecedented times that literally changed our planet in so many ways? I think so. And if I review my optimistic points and our younger generations, I do believe we'll come out on the other side having made giant steps in the right direction. And I just crossed my fingers.
right. Well, if I had to kind of bucket my outlook for retailers, is that the new normal will play out in 2023. I think physical retail is alive and well. Foot traffic was flat for holiday compared to last year.
Yeah.
Retailers are finally getting their budgets back. And it's not like they're going to be, spending money like a drunken sailor, but they will have money to spend. They're going to be very cautious about how they spend that money.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge focus on the shopping journey, hybrid shopping, customer experience. We're going to see more spend in store designs. For example, Ulta Beauty just rolled out their new floor layout. But what they're doing, which is really smart, is instead of going back and remodeling all the Ulta Beauty stores, which is what we used to do in the past, you come out with a new design and then you go back and you redo all your stores. They're just redoing the new stores going out, which to me is prudent with that capital money, right? We're going to see less inventory holdings by retailers, whether that means less on-hand inventory, whether that means more marketplaces, or whether that means curtailed assortments in the store. Retailers have figured out that less is actually more. And the last thing I will add, although I could just keep going on and on and on, but I'll end it here, is the role of the retail worker. We see lots of investments in the retail workers' pay, benefits, flex schedules, creation of environments that build a mutual commitment between workers and employers, and inclusive work environments.
Yep, I think all those points are very well taken. I think you're right on. So, is that a wrap? I think so.
For our listeners, you can find more of our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and therobinreport.com. Look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media and link in with us for the latest thoughts about the industry.
And I want to thank all of you again as well. I think it's been a lively conversation here, and I think on some very important points. Anyway, but if you guys, any of you, have some idea of what you would like to hear in a major way, just send me an email at Robin, ROBIN, at therobinreport.com. And thanks again.